Okay, so I only want to talk about, I mean, if Shemitah is coming up this coming year, and I'm not going to talk about any practicalities of the Shemitah. I want to do just the few key sources about the topic whether Shemitah today is Midiaraisa and HaTorah or Midirabbanan. That's all I want to do. And as far as today, it is an important issue for today because if you want to talk about Heter Mechira, you can only get off the ground if Shemitah is Midirabbanan. That's the only way. And indeed, a couple of weeks ago, I downloaded Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's Madane Eretz. I got a PDF file of the whole thing, so I read the introduction. And he has a very organized mind, a super organized mind. He says, what does everybody agree about, and what do they argue about? And of course, one of the first thing he says is everybody agrees that we're functioning under Shemitah D'Rabbanan today. Okay. So the final answer, we know. Otherwise, there would be no discussion of any Heter Mechira. But the sources are interesting in their own right, and we'll do just the basic sources, read them, and see what we can dig out of it. I actually learned a lot of this stuff with Joseph, but we never got to sort of look at it as a unit. So I think this time maybe I might have figured a thing or two out over here. So let's go to the share screen and look inside. Even okay. Bifnim. Okay. The first most explicit source on the topic is a Sifra, Torat Kohanim. Okay, remember that's a Tanaitic source. It's a Midrash Halacha. So that gives derivations of laws. Mishnah in general only gives statements of fact. Occasionally it has a derivation, but usually statements of fact. So the Sifra says, Minayin asay shvi'is afal pisha ein yovel. Apparently, the Sifra is quite clear that it's quite possible that maybe there is Shavias, Shmita, Shmita's Karka, the usual Shmita, without Yovel. Talmud Lomar, v'hayu lecha sheva shabso shonim. Uminayin asay Yovel afal pisha ein Shavias. Talmud Lomar teisha v'arbuim shana devrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is kind of backwards, all right? It's hard to anybody to explain this phrase. How are you going to do Yovel when you don't have Shvias? I mean, if you're not counting the cycle 7777, then there's no Yovel. Okay, so there are all kinds of explanations. It's a very difficult phrase, very difficult, and I'm not going to spend time on it. V'chachamim omrim Shvias no heges afal pisha ein Yovel. Even though it's possible that there's no Yovel, you still have Shavias, you have Shmita Sakarka, what we do. But HaYovel ain't no heg, and imken yeshimo Shavias. You cannot imagine Yovel without Shavias. Okay? So it's clear from the Sifra, both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, they say that Shmita, what we have Shmita's Karka, that you don't work the fields, that's forever. It's always Midiaraisa. It's about as straightforward as you can get. Okay? It's always Midiaraisa. Okay. Now, we studied a sugya back in Erechin. We read a sugya in Erechin. Okay? And that was talking about, if you recall, Kedusha Rishona, Kedusha Shniya. And there was an argument whether when they came in the days of Yehoshua, was that enough to create the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael forever or not? And the Gemara says, and I don't know if I read this part. My time of demandi Omar, Kedusha Rishon or Kitchel Shatav Alo, Kitchel Osad Lovo. There was one opinion that says that the first Kedusha, that for the days of Yehoshua, was only for its time. So in Golas Bavel, there was a no Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. And when they came back, they had to start over again. So how do we know that? So he says the Chsiv, this is when there's a whole, and Nehemiah describes a whole collection of the people returning from Bavel, coming to Yerushalayim, and sort of almost sounds like a reacceptance of the Torah, rededication to the Torah. And it says, Vayasu b'nei hagolah hashavim and hashvi sukkos, vayeshvu basukos. So they celebrated the holiday of Sukkos and they sat in the Sukkah. Ki lo asu mimei Yehoshua ben Nun kain b'nei Yisrael. They haven't sat in the Sukkah since the days of Yehoshua ben Nun. V'atahi simcha gadol lama'o. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Efshar bar David v'lo asu Sukkos ad shebo Ezra. Can you really tell me that through the whole period from when Yehoshua first came into the country until the whole period of before Beis HaMikdash, what is it? It's about almost 800 years. You're telling me they never sat in a sukkah? Can't be. But rather, the verse is expressing something different. Elamakish biyasam b'mei Ezra lebiyasam yomei Yehoshua. It's now saying something different. Namely, the issue of the sukkah is left. This kilo asu is a new thought that says that the arrival when Ezra came in the days of Ezra and the arrival in the days of Yehoshua are similar and analogous one to the other. When they came in the days of Yehoshua, they started counting the 7-year cycles and the 50-year cycle, and they consecrated the walled cities. Same thing. Af biyasam b'mei Ezra, manu shmitim v'yavlos v'kidshu arechomo. Okay? And they had to do it all over again. So that means that what? The Kedusha Rishona was only Kidsha L'Shata because they had to start over again. Okay? All right. So now let's go a little further. Let's skip that last line. I want to save the time. Okay? So the Gemara now asks, how do you say that they kept the cycles in the days of Evra? Umim manu shmitin v'yovlos. Did they really keep Shmita and Yovel in the days of the second Beis HaMikdash? Hashta, now Mishagalu Shevet Reuven v'Shevet Gad v'Chatzi Shevet Menashe Batlu HaYovlos. Okay. At the end of the Beis HaMikdash, there were stages of exile. Malchut Yisrael came first. Then came later Malchut, and Malchut Yehuda later came in 2 waves, and in fact, even Malchut Yisrael came in 2 waves. Okay, so he says when the area of the Golan was lopped off by either Tiglath-Pileser or Shalmaneser, Rashi says Sancheirav. I can't figure that out yet, but it happened. There was no Yovel. Ezra d'chsiv be kol hakahol ke'echad rabba ribo alafim v'sheish miyos v'shishim havamani. He says, if you say that there was no Yovel in the last 140, 150 years of the Beis HaMikdash, 120 years, sorry, last 120 years of the Beis HaMikdash, if you're going to say that that there was no Yovel, certainly when Ezra came back with only 40,000 people out of the whole Jewish people, you're going to tell me they celebrated Yovel? And now he gives the proof. The Sanya, Mishagalu Shevet Reuven v'Shevet Gad v'Chatzi Shevet HaManashe, Batlu HaYovlos. There was no Yovel. Why? Shenemar Krasam Dror Ba'aretz L'chol Yoshveha. Well, bisman shekol yoshveha aleha, v'lo bisman shegalu miktsasam. In order to have Yovel, the 50-year cycle, you have to have the full Jewish people in the land of Israel. Okay? The Bryce even says a little more than that. Yochol hayu aleha v'hayu me'uravin. Shevet Binyamin b'Yehuda v'Shevet Yehuda b'Binyamin yehei Yovel noheg. Would you say that? Namely, if the population is mixed up and not on the areas that they were apportioned when they apportioned the land in the days of Yehoshua. Talmud loma lachol yoshveha bizman sheyoshveha ketikunon v'lo bizman shehem ma'uravin. So you see that there was no Yovel at the end of the last part of the first Beis HaMikdash. How can you even imagine that there was Yovel during the second Beis HaMikdash? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Mona Yovlos l'kadesh Shmitin. They counted the Yovel in order to consecrate the Shemitah year. Rashi will explain it in a minute. We'll read the Rashi in a moment. What it means is the Shemitah went in its regular 7-year cycles. The 50th year was not really Yovel, but they kept it as an empty year, not doing anything. So that the next year when they started, that would be the first year of the new Shemitah cycle that would then go 777 and then have another Yovel at the end. Okay. What does that sound like when it says L'kadesh Shmitin? It sounds to me like L'kadesh Shmitin is Min HaTorah. Monu Yovlos, so that the Shemitah will be Min HaTorah. Yeah. Maybe if we keep the calendar, the counting of the numbers correctly, even though Yovel does not apply, the Shemitah will apply. Okay? Watch how Rashi speaks. It's a little subtle here. Okay? Elsewhere, he makes it more explicit, but watch. Rashi says, Vada Yovel lo haya noheg, sheyehu avodim niftarim mishum Yovel. V'lo sodos shel mecher chosros. There is no such thing. Right, let me move this guy over here a bit. Okay, I got it. And you don't have fields going back the way it's described in the Parsha and the Bahar. That's for sure now. Aval shmitin hayu no hagim l'shamet ksafim u'l'shamet mizera v'kotzir. You always have to remember that there are two issues in Shmita. One is the agricultural issue that is discussed in great length in Bahar. The other one is discussed in Re'eh that we're gonna read next week. Okay, and that talks about cancellation of debts at the end of the Shemitah year. Okay, about the cancellation of debts at the end of the Shemitah year. See, when I read this first, I didn't pay attention, and I still thought Rashi held L'kadesh Shmitin meant Min HaTorah. But he says, Hayu no hagim. Rashi would not use the word no hag. They did it that way. It was their custom to do it if he meant that it was the Oraisa. He wouldn't have used that. And he explains now L'kadesh Shmitin, no hagim is really midrabanan. And we'll see in a moment where he makes that explicit. Okay. But let's finish reading the Rashi. The hatzrichim limno shnas hayovel kedei sheyavou hashmitin b'mekomam shelebesof sheva shmitos hayu manichim shnas chamishim. Okay. What does that mean? They didn't count it for the next beginning of the next Shemitah cycle. And then in what would normally be the 51st year, that would be the beginning of the new 50-year cycle. Okay? All right, that's what Rashi is explaining. Okay, so from this Gemara, I personally would take out that Shemitah was the Oraisa from this expression in the Gemara, Min HaTorah. But it's quite clear, it's going to be very explicit soon that Rashi is learning here Midrabanan. Let's see what's going on. That's one source that you have to deal with. And why is the source explicit? Because the source makes explicit, it ties two things together. It says explicitly that Yovel is not there is no Yovel in Bayasheni, and nonetheless there is a Shemitah in Bayasheni. Okay, it turns out we're a little vague on whether the Shemitah is Min HaTorah or not. Okay, remember the first source said the Shemitah was unequivocal. Shemitah is Min HaTorah. Okay. Now we go to another topic. Okay. In Gemara You got to strap your seatbelt on because you never know where you're going to end up. Okay, so we're in Moed Katan now. Okay, we're in the first chapter of Moed Katan. So let's see what it says. Tanan, Mashkin Beis Hashlochin b'Moed u'b'Shviyas. What's Beis Hashlochin? Beis Hashlochin, everybody explains, that is a field that requires irrigation. Namely, the rain cycle is throughout the year is insufficient to provide enough water for the field. So you're allowed to irrigate the field, bring water into the field. In Moed, that means in Chol HaMoed, and in the Shmita year. That's what it says in the Mishnah. Right, so the Gemara asks, we're right over here. Bishlam HaMoed mishum tirchahu, u'b'makom seder shari rabbana. Okay, in Chol HaMoed, work that is forbidden is that we do not want a person to physically exert himself during Chol HaMoed and be bothered and be taken up with his problems, okay? However, if the field is going to rot because you didn't do it during Chol HaMoed, certainly the Chachamim are not going to are not going to insist that you don't water the field, okay? Ela Shviyas, okay? Bein lemanda amar mishum zorea, bein lemanda amar mishum charesh, zoria v'charisha b'shviyas mishari. What's that line mean? The question is, min haTorah, two fundamental malachot, agricultural malachot, are forbidden in shviyas: planting and plowing. Now the question is, watering a field, under which category does that apply? So apparently there was an argument. One says for this one says for that one, okay? Okay, but it's not a separate one because the Torah only says Charisha and Zriya. But the Gemara says, no matter which one it belongs to, if you're in Shmita, how can you water a field? Okay. So Amar Abaya says that this Mishnah is not the theoretical Midiaraisa, Bishvias Bisman Hazeh, Rebbe. The Sanya, this Mishnah is according to the opinion of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe. The Sanya Rebbe Omer, V'zeh Dvar Hashmita Shamot. Okay. The derivation from the verse is to put the two words together, even though V'zeh Dvar Hashmita has a colon in front of it. This is the law of Shmita. Now comes the discussion of cancellation and debts. This is a verse that is in Re'eh. We're going to read it next week. So ostensibly, when you just read it ordinarily, it's not talking about the agricultural Shemitah at all. Okay? It's not. But the drasha in the verse says, because the two words are sitting one absolutely next to the other, Rebbe Omer b'shnei shmitos hakasuv medaber. Acha shmitas karka ve'acha shmitas ksofim. That this verse is actually giving a hint that the two of them, the two qualities of the 7 year, go together. Bisman she'atom meshamet karka, atom meshamet ksofim. When you have an agricultural sabbatical year, then the laws of cancellation of debts apply. Ubisman she'iatom meshamet karka, and if you're in a situation where there is no shmita in terms of the agricultural quality of shmita, iatom meshamet ksofim, you don't. All right. So Rashi says, where is it further down? Let me find it. Here is it. Bisman she'iatom meshamet karka. There is no explicit there is no explicit derivation, okay, that literally says that Shemitah is midrabanan. There is no explicit. Rashi just says from the way the brisa expresses itself, it's michlal the ikazman the lo meshamet karka. Apparently, the brisa entertains the thought that there is a period in Jewish history that there's no Shemitah. Well, during when they have a Beis HaMikdash and they have Yovel, they obviously have Shmita. Therefore, When's the period that they don't have Shmita? Now. Okay? Now there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no Yovel, there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's nothing, there's no Shmita. Okay, that's how Rashi learns. Okay. So Rashi Abaya understands this Mishnah as being according to Rebbe, who explicitly claims that Shmita B'zman Hazeh is the Rabbanon. Okay. Rava Amar Afilu Tema Rabbanon. By the way, there's no explicit place that it says V'chachamim Omrim, etc. The only explicit place there is no explicit place in the Bavli. It's only in this Sifra that we read at the very beginning. Afilu Tema Rabbanon, namely that Shmita is min HaTorah. Okay. Avos Asarachmana. Todos lo Asarachmana. Namely, even if you'll say that watering a field is either Charisha or Zriya, Rava says, according to the Chachamim, there is no such thing. Watering is permissible, period. Namely, you're allowed to maintain a field. You're not allowed to plant or plow. Okay? Avos Asarachmana told us lo Asarachmana. As Rashi says at the bottom, Avos Malachos Asarachmana b'Shviyas. Okay? And told us, no, you can, in Shviyas, you're allowed to water a field. So now it's explicit in this Gemara that it's an argument between Rebbe and the Chachamim. That's pretty explicit. Okay? Right? Because Abaya says that this brisa is like Rebbe. Maybe Abaya thinks that Rebbe is a universal opinion. And Rava says, no, it's like, and Rava says, no, even like Chachamim, even like the Chachamim that it's min HaTorah. Okay? Except that watering a field is not in the category. So from this Gemara, you're left with an argument between Rebbe and the Chachamim, whether Shmita is min HaTorah or not. It turns out that this brisa, that is this statement of Rebbe, is requoted in another context. Okay, what's the context? The context is what we call prisbul. Okay, the context is what's prisbul. Prisbul is at the end of the Shemitah year. Normally, min HaTorah, there is cancellation of debts. So Hillel Hazaken in the time of the Bayesheni. Hillel saw that people stop lending one to another. As the Yovel came close, because what's going to happen? Every time Shmita came close, every time Shmita came close, people stopped lending one to another. Okay. Because they're going to lose the debt when the Shmita comes. If the guy doesn't have the money, he's just off the hook. If he's a decent person, he'll pay back, but there's no chiyuv to. All right. So Hillel saw, well, if we maintain the law of Shmitas Ksafim, we'll end up transgressing another law, that you're not allowed to be heartless about lending money to another person in need. So therefore, he made a prusbul. That in a prusbul, you then have a workaround in such a way that the debt is collected for you by a court, etc. But the mechanics of the prusbul is not important to me right now. Okay, but he has a workaround. So the Gemara asked, Umi the midioraisa mashamta shvius for Hillel tikin the lo mashamta. Huh? Could Hillel make a takana? All right, that there's no shvius. Is that possible? All right. How can he get around the shvius min haTorah? So Abaya gives the same answer he gave to the other problem. Amar Abaya b'shvius b'zman hazeh v'Rebbehi. Nowadays, Shviyas is midrabanon. That means in the time of Hillel, in Bayesheni, there was no Yovel, and now Abaya is saying that Rebbe says there was no Shmita. So that's why Hillel could do it. And he quotes the same brisa. The Sanya, Rebbe Yomer, Bezed Dvar Hashmita, Shamot, right? The two words next to one another. Bishtei Shmitos HaKasuv Medaber. There are two types of Shmita. One is Shmitas Karka, the agricultural Shmita, and V'acha Shmitas Ksofim, let's say the monetary Shmita. And indeed, they go hand in hand. When one applies, the other applies. Bizman she'atom meshamet karka, atom meshamet ksofim. Bizman she'i atom meshamet karka, I atom meshamet ksofim. Okay? V'tiknu Rabbanan that tishamed zecher l'shvius. Ra Hillel saw that nobody was lending money to one another. Shem nimnu ha'amil halvo zeh amad v'tiken pruzbo. That's the Gemara. Okay. Rashi is now, if you recall, Rashi's just explained, just a moment ago in Moed Kotan explained that what? The Shemitah B'zman Hazeh has to be, is Midivrei Chachamim, because from this verse, it's, the Brisa says there's a time when Shemitah doesn't apply. So apparently it must be now, okay? Rashi here is going to speak a little differently. Take a look at this. B'shvius B'zman Hazeh, the Hillel Kerebi Svirale. Hillel learns like Rebbe. The Omar Shvius Lahashmatas Milvo B'zman Hazeh Midarabonanu. So Rashi asks, Va'af agav the Hillel B'bayis Sheni Hava. Hillel was in the second Beis HaMikdash, and for a second you might imagine that Shemitah was min HaTorah. So how did Gemara say Shemitah is min HaChachamim? Svira Leila Abaya is of the opinion that B'bayis Sheni however lo hoya yovel noheg lo nohagu Shemitah midyaraisa. Okay. But he says Shemitah had to be min HaTorah. And now Rashi makes this comment that I made right before. The Aminim be'erech emanu yovlos l'kadei Shmitin midrabanan komar. So according to Rashi, Abaya understands Hillel as saying that in Baya Sheni Shemitah, the Shmitas Ksofim and the agricultural Shemitah were both min HaChachamim. All right. And now he's going to say something in a moment. He now finds Umatzasi b'talmid Rabbini Yitzchak Halevi shekosa b'maseches Gittin b'Yerushalmi. Minayin she'en hashmita noheges ela b'zman shehayovel noheg. Now all of a sudden, for the first time, we're going to get an explicit derivation, an explicit statement that the Shemitah is dependent upon Yovel. Shenamar v'zed dvar hashmita, ach hashmitas Yovel v'ach hashmitas Shvius. They have to come together. You can only have one. You can't have one without the other. Okay, you can't have one without the other. So that means whenever there is Yovel, there is Shemitah, and vice versa. And now he says, Avo b'Toras Kohanim, that's a sifra we read at the very, very beginning. Ra'isi, I saw, the Shvius noheg b'zman she'en Yovel noheg. V'ani omer shehu machlokas. All right. Well, in all candor, it's got to be a machlokas, all right? The Toras Kohanim says one way, and the Yerushalmi says it explicitly the other way, the way Rashi understands Yerushalmi, okay? So it has to be, there's a difference of opinion. So Rebbe is of the opinion that Shvius, both in agriculture, remember, the first thing we just read about watering your fields is agricultural Shemitah. And here's the monetary Shemitah, Abaya's understanding that they're both men HaChachamim, according to Rebbe. Okay, all right. So Rava asks, Rava says, the Gemara turns everything around. Umiga the midiraisa lo mishamta shvius tikun rabbanan shame. You can turn the thing around. Min HaTorah, the guy is supposed to pay the money back, right? That was the takana of Hillel. Your next page. The takana of Hillel was that you're supposed to pay the money back. Well, if in the Torah says you don't have to pay the money back, how can Hillel force you to pay the money back? It's like a gezel, right? So Amar Abaya, Shevi al Tasahu. Namely, we don't take the money away from him. We just say that the debt is still functioning. We're not doing anything. We're not walking to his house, picking up the money, pulling it out of his house. We're just hanging back, right? And not enforcing the law and letting the debt take its course. Okay? So he's saying we're really being passive, we're not being active. That's what he's arguing. Okay, so even though Min HaTorah, he's not obligated to pay, we are letting him pay. Rava doesn't buy that. Rava says, Hefker Bezdin, Hoya Hefker. Rava says, Rava says, the court has the power to take money from one person to another and give it to another. Remember, the courts have the power to declare the money that you possess. Right? We have a very high respect of private property. However, in a circumstance like this, the court has the right to appropriate a person's money. And Rashi says, and now you notice in both cases, you can even say Shmitta is the eraser. Rashi points out. So in both cases, Rava is understanding like the Chachamim that Shmitta is Min HaTorah. That's what Rashi says. And nonetheless, Prisbal is not a problem because basically the court is taking money from one person to another. It's not an Isur Veheter, it's about money. And the court has the capacity, and he gives a derivation as to what it is. Okay. So these are the main Gemaras in the Bavli that talk about whether Shmitta is Min HaTorah or not. There's that first Gemara in Erechin, where it says Mana Yovlos Lakadei Shmitin. So it's clear for that the Gemara's Yovel is not Min HaTorah, but it's vague what Lakadei Shmitin is. And here the two Gemaras with Rebbe and the Chachamim through the eyes of Abaya and Rava. That's it. Okay. But let's go back and look at the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi is very interesting. It turns out it's clear to me that the Rishonim, not only Rashi, but even Tosfos and Rabbeinu Tam, maybe the Ramban, I have to go back and look on the Ramban, they did not see the Yerushalmi for itself. They only saw a partial quote from the Yerushalmi. Okay. All right. Do we have time? Yeah, I have a couple of minutes. So let me just point it out. Okay. So Yerushalmi quotes the Mishnah about Prisbal, and Mikan Samchu LePrisbal Shehum. Now the Gemara wants to discuss the same problem. If Shmitta is Midiaraisa, correct? How can you have such a thing? So the Gemara quotes a brisa that says, Mikan Samchu LePrisbal Shehum Min HaTorah. Whoa. Okay, from this verse that you're forbidden to hold back a loan from a person in need, it says that this shows that Prisbal is Min HaTorah. Gemara says, what? Prisbal Dvar Torah? Who can't be? We're reading the Yerushalmi now. Okay. Kishehiskin Hillel Samchuhu Lidvar Torah. That's what it means. It means when Hillel made the takana, they used that verse as a hint. Okay. So Amar Rabbi Chona, Kashyasa Komei Rav Yaakov Bar Yaakov. I'm not too. I think he asked. Kashyasa means he asked Rav Yaakov Bar Acha, and he said, "Keman Masros Midivrei Torah." Now, Masros Midivrei Torah. Earlier in the Yerushalmi, there's an argument where Trumos and Maasros nowadays are in Bayesheni even are min haTorah min hachachamim. Okay. So, and you can't have Trumas or Maasros without having Shmita. So in the Yerushalmi, the lingo is Maasros v'divrei Torah is now a proxy for saying that Shavias is min haTorah. Okay. All right. Okay. Commande Amar Masos, according to the person who says that Shvius is min haTorah, is a conceivable Hillel Maskin al Dvar Torah? Can that be? Amar Rabbi Yossi v'chimisha shegolul Yisrael above lo niftaru min hamitzos hatluyos ba'aretz. When the Jews left Eretz Yisrael, they were finished with the mitzvos that depended on the land. So he doesn't get a chance to say everything he wants to say. The Gemara just shoots back. Wait, we're talking about the monetary Shemitah. Monetary Shemitah doesn't depend on the land. It's Shemitah is worldwide. In the 7th year of Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, the business of cancellation of debts is personal obligations. That has nothing to do with the land of Eretz Yisrael. So that's worldwide. So the Gemara interjects. Hashmatas ksofim. No heg bein ba'oretz, bein b'chutz la'oretz, dvar Torah. Chazer Rabbi Yosef Yamar, v'zeh dvar hashmita shamot, and he now repeats exactly what we just read. B'zman shashmita noheges dvar Torah, hashmatas ksofim, noheges bein ba'oretz, bein b'chutz la'oretz, dvar Torah. Ub'shosh hashmita noheges midivreim, hashmet ksofim noheges bein ba'oretz, bein b'chutz la'oretz, midivreim. Okay, so that's exactly like Rebbe, what we read. So Rabbi Yossi's answer is that the takana, the prusbul of Hillel, is only under the assumption that Shmita is midivrei, is min haTorah. Okay, it's only under the assumption Shmita is min haTorah. Okay, I put in the Pnei Moshe for those who want to read it themselves. Okay, and then when I work through the Pnei Moshe, then I understand what's going on. Okay, Tamon Amrinan, the Yerushalmi says, so it's so interesting. Tamon Amrin, the Yerushalmi says, there they say. You remember in the old days in grocery goods when they referred to the other hotel as Dorton? Okay, Tamon Amrin in Bovel they're saying, okay. I feel a command Amar Masros Devar Torah, even according to the person that says that Maaser is min haTorah, that would mean, remember that phrase is also a proxy for the agricultural Shemitah as being min haTorah, because you can't have Truma or Maaser without the agricultural Shemitah. Moda b'Shmita shehi midivreiha. He agrees that the monetary Shemitah, that's min hachachamim. The Tani v'zeh shmar hashmita shamod, Rebbe Omer, shnei shmitan halol shmita v'yovel. B'sho'asha hayovel noheg, shmita noheg devar Torah. Okay? He's talking about shmitas ksofim now. Paski yovlos, shmita noheges midivrehem. So you see, the Rashi did not see the whole Yerushalmi. Because this Rashi used this quote to show that Shmita in general is midavrehem, but the Yerushalmi is explicit that this is according to the person that Shmita's karka, the agricultural Shmita, is the araisa, and the Shmita of money is midavrehem. Is midavrehem no matter what, because there's no yovel. Okay, these are, I'll stop here. We did enough. We have the 4 most basic, with the Torah Kohanim, We have what? Toras Kohanim, Erechin, Moed Katan, Gittin, and the Yerushalmi here. These are the primary loci. This is the primary focus of everybody when they want to discuss the issue of Shemitah's Minhat Torah, namely Tosfos in its various places, Ramban in his various places. All the discussions focus mostly, almost exclusively on these basic sources. So in that sense, this is what I want to present. That's the background for everything that goes on today. This is the theoretical background of everything that goes on today. The analysis of these texts, okay, and then the practicalities of Shemitah today. That's really past me. I'm not up to that. Okay, so we're going to stop here. There's a new sheriff in town, right? Correct. New rabbi is coming to town. So, so we'll let him set up his or whatever program he wants to set up, okay? And no matter what happens down the road, we'll take a break now for the end of the summer and through the Chagim. So we'll just leave it at that. So at this point, that's it for the season. Okay, guys? Okay, take care.
Good summer, everybody. We'll see you.
Right, have a good summer. Take care, Joseph. Okay.